All right, let's step into a world that has been pushed way, way past the absolute brink of human endurance. Today, I'm taking you through the complete anatomy of a rebellion. We're going to do a meticulous breakdown of how an ordinary, quiet life gets fractured, reshaped, and ultimately weaponized against the exact same system that tried to crush it. This is a story of radicalization and the terrifying, absolutely inevitable explosion that follows when a society is just bled dry. So grab a seat, because this narrative demands our immediate and absolute attention. We are going to explore the darkest corners of totalitarian control and find out exactly where the human spirit finally breaks.
Now, I want to start by looking at this quote. "I am no soldier. I am no priest. I'm just a farmer." This opening confession is so crucial because it grounds the entire tragedy of our narrative. Notice how the protagonist defines himself entirely by what he is not. He doesn't hold a weapon of the state. He wields absolutely zero institutional or divine authority. By deliberately stripping away every single layer of societal power, he's revealing this raw, fundamental identity that is anchored purely to the earth. Think about it. A farmer represents patience, right? Cultivation, the giving of life. He coaxes seeds from the dirt. He doesn't take life from the living. Establishing this baseline of peaceful creation early on is just a total masterstroke of storytelling, because it makes his eventual brutal transformation into a harbinger of absolute destruction feel incredibly profound and honestly, deeply unsettling. We are watching a man who builds the world be violently forced to tear it all down.
Which brings us to part one of our breakdown, the broken land.
Just listen to this line. "The land is broken. We are forced to work beyond what our souls can take." You can practically feel the existential weight of this realization hanging over the entire first act. Because look, we aren't merely talking about a failed harvest here, or just the physical exhaustion of aching muscles after a long day in the blazing sun. No, this is atmospheric horror. The environment itself literally feels dead, poisoned not by a drought, but by sheer systemic cruelty. When labor becomes so intense, so deeply unjust and relentless that it actually shatters the human soul, well, the broken land becomes this huge metaphor for the moral and spiritual failure of the entire realm. It's an ecosystem of despair. It extracts not just the grain from the soil, but the actual humanity from the people forced to work it. Day in and day out, the essence of who they are is just slowly eroded away, until nothing but hollow shells remain.
Let's move into part two and look at how this actually works. The anatomy of oppression. So we have the king, but he isn't merely a monarch. He is the uncompromising, absolute manifestation of the law itself. And framing it this way introduces a truly terrifying reality into this universe. Think about what that means for a second. There is zero recourse, no higher justice. There's absolutely no court of appeals left for the everyday citizenry. When the king and the law are fundamentally the exact same entity, it means that every act of cruelty, every impossible demand, and every starvation-level tax is 100% legal. The peasants are systematically being bled dry, and the machinery of the state is perfectly, flawlessly designed to uphold that suffering. It's almost a psychological horror, you know? The villain doesn't even need to operate in the shadows here. The monster just sits right there on a throne, cloaked in complete legality, crushing entire generations without a single ounce of hesitation.
And we see that cruelty in this line. He says, "Pay taxes, you pay taxes. She's of age, then she must pay." I mean, this is the commodification of human life at its absolute most brutal and unforgiving. It is one thing to tax a percentage of a farmer's harvest, right? But to tax the very act of coming of age? That is a chilling expansion of tyranny. Just imagine it. The moment the youth step into adulthood, they aren't greeted with opportunity or celebration or hope for the future. Instead, boom, they are immediately fed right into this relentless financial meat grinder. They are literally born into an inescapable debt. Their mere existence, the simple act of drawing breath in this kingdom, is a commodity they have to constantly pay for. The state essentially views human beings purely as livestock, bred for one reason: to sustain the gluttony of the ruling class. And the loop never stops. He says, work harder, you work harder. The suffocating, inescapable rhythm of totalitarian control is just perfectly captured here. It is a closed, mechanical loop of tyranny. Command, followed by immediate, unquestioning obedience. Just the gears of oppression constantly turning and turning, crushing the workers right beneath them. There's zero room for negotiation here. There's no space allowed for fatigue, or human frailty, or even a sick day. The system just endlessly demands more, and the broken bodies of the workers have absolutely no choice but to comply or perish. It's such a masterful depiction of how absolute control conditions an entire populace into a state of robotic subservience, maintaining this relentless pressure cooker environment that is, frankly, entirely unsustainable.
And that unsustainability leads us right to part 3, the plowman's breaking point. We get to this line, "That's enough. Enough. We've given you enough." This right here, this is the definitive psychological snap of the entire narrative. The pacing of these words signals a monumental shift. It's an absolute death and a subsequent rebirth. Let's break it down. The first enough is a desperate plea. The second is a chilling realization. And that third one, that is a definitive declaration of war. In this singular heart-stopping moment, the peaceful farmer who only ever wanted to till his land dies, and a hardened revolutionary is born right from the corpse. The social contract is entirely, irrevocably voided. Our protagonist finally understands that the state will never, ever stop taking until there is absolutely nothing left of them but bones. So to simply survive, he has to refuse to take even one more step in submission.
But the transition isn't easy. He says, "I shouldn't have done that. Farmer, it is time to set the world on fire." We see this immediate, deeply human regret clashing instantly with the terrifying weight of his new destiny. He has crossed the Rubicon. By committing an act of defiance that the absolute law of the king can never ever forgive, he recognizes that there is no going back to the plow. The safety of his former life is entirely eradicated, gone forever. The only way forward now, the only way to protect what little remains of his people, is absolute purifying destruction. This cinematic trope of setting a corrupted world on fire is so powerful here because it forces us to watch a gentle man accept that he must become the inferno. He literally has to burn the old world down to the bedrock if he wants any hope of seeing something new and untainted grow from the ashes.
So, what happens next? Let's get into part 4, marching on the capital.
Now, you have to ask yourself, who leads them? What kind of tactical genius or seasoned, battle-hardened warrior could possibly unite all these disparate rebel factions and coordinate a massive, synchronized convergence on London? I mean, the ruling class is undoubtedly scrambling in their war rooms at this point, right? They're desperately trying to comprehend who could possibly possess the strategic mind to threaten the crown's military might so directly. The suspense here builds perfectly as the empire braces for a conqueror. And who is it? A plowman. The poetic irony of this revelation is just staggering. The crown isn't being threatened by a rival lord with a competing claim to the throne, and they aren't facing a foreign invader marching in with a professional, well-funded army. No, they are being brought to their absolute knees by the very man who tills their dirt. This completely ordinary man has been transformed by insurmountable grief and systemic injustice into an unlikely vessel for total societal upheaval. I just love the visual contrast here. It is breathtaking. You have a dirt-covered laborer standing as an equal, existential threat to a king sitting safely in a glittering, fortified castle. It is the ultimate nightmare for any oppressive hierarchy, isn't it? The very bottom of the pyramid suddenly deciding to stand up and shatter the entire foundation.
I mean, he's not alone. 10,000. I want you to just take a second and imagine the deafening rhythmic thunder of 10,000 boots hitting the dirt. The cinematic scale of this uprising is absolutely awe-inspiring. Remember, these are not conscripted soldiers fighting for a meager paycheck or chasing the manufactured glory of some distant king. These are 10,000 angry souls marching in terrifying unison with absolutely nothing left to lose. Why? Because the ruling system has already systematically stripped them of everything they ever had. A single man with nothing to lose is a danger, sure, but an army of 10,000 with nothing to lose, that is an unstoppable force of nature that threatens to rewrite the entire world order.
Then we hear him say, "There will be no peace until we are free." Listen, listen, can you not hear their rage? If you pay close attention, his voice actually lowers here. It loses its individual sorrow and completely adopts the heavy, resonant cadence of collective fury. He's no longer just a farmer from the fields. He has become a living megaphone for a completely broken nation. When he says, "Can you not hear their rage?" that is not a genuine question. It is a violent demand for the ruling class to finally acknowledge the humanity and the raw, unbridled power of the people they have treated like livestock for generations. The entire narrative shifts here, moving from a personal vendetta to a sweeping historical reckoning.
Which brings us to the climax in part 5, opening the gates. This brings us to a quote that really stuck with me. Once we draw blood, we open the gates of hell. This is really the moral crux of the entire cinematic journey. Our protagonist isn't romanticizing this rebellion at all.
He isn't portraying this war as some glorious, clean revolution filled with pristine heroes. He is agonizingly self-aware. He knows deep down that by drawing blood against the crown, he is unleashing an apocalyptic level of chaos that can never, ever be undone. He knows innocent people are going to be caught in the crossfire. He knows the state's retribution will be absolutely monstrous. And that is the profound tragedy here, a hero forced to become a monster just to defeat a monster. He is willingly unsealing the gates of hell, simply because the hell of their daily existence under the king's law has become far, far worse than the hell of all-out war.
And how does the crown respond? The king says, "I see chaos and fear. Crush them." The staggering arrogance of the king is just on full display here. Think about the contrast. Where the plowman sees a necessary, deeply tragic fight for survival and freedom, the monarch sees only a pestilence. There's zero introspection on his part. Tyrants historically view uprisings not as human cries for help or even as symptoms of their own failed leadership, but merely as logistical annoyances, like an insect infestation that just requires immediate brutal eradication. The king completely dismisses their humanity, issuing this cold, calculated order that sets the stage for a massive massacre without a single shred of empathy or moral hesitation.
But the rebellion has a counter to that military might. God has taken much from us to show us the truth. Surrender to it and never set you free. With this, the rebellion arms itself with the most terrifying weapon of all, profound, uncompromising purpose. We're looking at the dark power of weaponized trauma and religious fanaticism. Our protagonist interprets their immense generational suffering not as meaningless, cruel torture, but as divine revelation. He literally twists their agony into a holy crusade, by convincing his followers that they were broken only so they could finally perceive the ultimate truth of their oppression. He makes their psychological resolve completely invincible. They aren't just angry farmers holding pitchforks anymore. They truly believe they are the instruments of divine retribution, marching under the banner of heaven itself.
And that brings us to the end. Time to pay. The narrative circles all the way back to its grim beginning, but the dynamic is entirely violently reversed. Remember, the story started with the king demanding the peasants pay their taxes, pay with their youth, pay with their sweat and their very blood. But now? Now the relentlessly oppressed have finally turned around, marched right up to the impenetrable gates of their oppressors, and demanded that the ultimate debt be settled. It leaves us with this haunting, lingering reflection on the cyclical nature of oppression and violence. When the people a system has deliberately broken decide it is finally time for the architects of their suffering to pay up, what happens to a society when the cost extracted is nothing short of apocalyptic?